Welcome to Mindshift. I'm Brandon, and today is episode 6 of my series Beyond the Bible, where we look at all works of Christian literature outside of the Protestant Canon. We started with the Apocrypha, we're still in it, and today we'll be looking at the book of Baruch. It mainly consists of 3 parts, and we'll get to that in a minute, but let's start with point 1, which is Canon Controversy. Why did this not make the cut? Baruch comes down to 2 things. 1, it was written in Greek. It's only ever been written in Greek. We've never found a Hebrew manuscript copy. It only exists in the Septuagint. So it not being a part of the Masoretic text excludes it. 2, there was no clear apostolic endorsement or quotation in the New Testament. So why did the Catholics choose to include it then? We've already talked enough about the Council of Trent in 1546, where kind of the final deciding factors of what's going to be canon or not and why are listed out. This is a counter-Reformation effort, if you will. So the first reason that the Catholics said, no, let's keep it, is due to its theological import. It is a book about repentance and divine mercy. Also, it had already been used liturgically for centuries, particularly during Advent and penitential seasons. Insofar as they cared, it aligned with doctrine. They viewed it as complementary to Jeremiah, which we're going to get into that in point 2. And one of the main things that just needs to be understood here is that Protestants had this hard line in the sand. Mainly, again, that it was included in the Hebrew Bible, where the Catholics just said, how many Christians have taken value from this book? And it became more about the tradition and the history. I think there's interesting points on both sides, but again, it's just fascinating to me how this religion has split in so many different ways, including such a significant portion of the Bible just being removed after so long. It really is baffling to think about the Reformation, and we will do a video on the Reformation when we get done with the Apocrypha, but can you imagine if that happened today? Can you imagine if our 66 books that we've been using for so long, that so many Christians are so familiar with and have had so much use in, all of a sudden gets cut down to 52? And you had one group that kept with the 66 and another that was the 52 who just completely did not believe in the validity of the 66. It's the same thing. It really truly is wild. Also, I always talk in terms of Protestant and Catholic, but also you have the Eastern Orthodox, who, by the way, also include Baruch in their canon. We will get in later into some of the differences between the Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox. Let's move quickly on to point 2, where we set the stage. We'll talk about authorship, date, and context. The book is traditionally attributed to Baruch, who was Jeremiah's scribe. We see that in Jeremiah 36, and if that time frame were correct, it would have placed this book somewhere near the 6th century BCE, during or shortly after the Babylonian exile. So why do people think that Baruch wrote it? Because the book opens like this in Baruch 1:1. These are the words of the book which Baruch wrote in Babylon. It is a direct claim. We don't always get this. We get alluding to. The content, however, aligns with the exile period, the themes of the exile. That is our setting for this book, whether it was written then or not. But we have good reason, many good reasons to believe that it is not actually written by Baruch, Jeremiah's scribe, that it was written much later, probably in the 2nd century BCE, maybe even the 1st. Some scholars have argued as far back as the 3rd, but I think the general consensus is like around 150 BCE. So what are some of the issues with the traditional view of this book and authorship? Well, 1, the text is written in Greek, not Aramaic, not Hebrew, the languages that Baruch would have used, that Jeremiah was written in. And again, by the way, pseudonymous writings were very common at this time. So the early Jewish and Christian traditions accepting that wasn't really a big deal. Also, utilizing a scribe instead of a more prominent biblical figure also points to the fact that this was during the Hellenistic period or the Second Temple period, where this kind of thing was much more common. Same thing with the themes and style. We see a Hellenistic influence so much as opposed to what we clearly see with more typical 5th or 6th century Jewish writings. I know it's hard for us, and I'm no Hebrew or Greek scholar, but I've heard it explained as such, as if you read something that was written today, even if it was about events during the Revolutionary War here in the States versus something actually written during the Revolutionary War, you can tell pretty quickly a difference there. Little details, language, grammar, things that have evolved over time, errors with certain settings or places or people. There's a ton ton of information here that scholars way smarter than myself, even Christian scholars, have agreed, yeah, this was not written by Baruch. It was not written in the 6th century. And so there's really not much arguing left for that. And again, what we see with so many of these books in the Apocrypha when it comes to the context is this is all written for scattered groups of Jewish people living in a melting pot of different ideologies, philosophies, and other religious ideas. There's a temple on every corner, and most of them are not Jewish synagogues. And so it's like this updating or this new material to keep the Jewish tradition and roots alive, especially whoever this author was, referencing back so much to the exile period and God's mercy, but divine wrath and judgment and the use of another culture to do so. It's trying to make sense of what is happening to them in their time and place, and again, calling back on tradition. So that's a little bit about the context there. I think we can move straight into point 3, which is book overview. And again, we're going to do this in 3 segments. Segment 1 is all about repentance and confession. The confessional part is right off the bat. It is this communal acceptance of or acknowledgement of guilt, and also a plea for mercy. I'll just refer to the writer as Baruch for simplicity. Baruch is not saying, oh, woe is me. Oh, how could God have done this to us? Some of the things that we see elsewhere in the Bible. He says, yeah, no, we had this coming. We were disobedient and God had no other choice. But through collective prayer and repentance, maybe we can change God's mind. Maybe he will show us mercy. So the structure here is interesting because Baruch 1 through 14, we have this historical framing where Baruch records a confession in Babylon, and it's intended to be read during Jewish assemblies, as well as accompanied by offerings in the temple. They brought offerings and read aloud the book of the confession. So again, tying it to the narrative of the exile, we see the confession in Baruch 1:15 all the way through the end of this section, 3:8. The people confess their sins, they acknowledge their need for God and their failure to obey his commands, making ever clear that this is on them. So you'll see that in like Baruch 1:15, to the Lord our God belongs righteousness, but to us open shame. Again, just berating themselves down, lowering themselves down, making themselves as small as possible before God and hoping for his mercy. So, collective responsibility and covenant theology. Very important and expressed right away here in the book of Baruch. And it's interesting knowing what we know now to go back and read this kind of thing and see that even centuries after the fact, how the Jewish people were still trying to make sense of this, putting the blame fully on them, not taking into account at all Babylon's imperial ambitions or any kind of outside external political factors, right? Like it is just through this narrow, myopic framing of we sinned, God did this to us. And I just think that's interesting. But let's move on to the second segment here, which is all about wisdom, the path forward. How do we avoid this again? And this transition, by the way, from repentance to wisdom is something else that we see pretty common throughout the Jewish Bible. It's personified as eternal. It is a gift from God, and it can be found through even the readings of the written scriptures, the Torah. So we start with the search for wisdom. We can see right away in this segment, Baruch 3:29, who has gone up into heaven and taken her and brought her down from the clouds, contrasting human ignorance with divine omniscience. Baruch 4:1 says, she is the book of the commandments of God, the law that endures forever. So wisdom is not just some nice thing. Divine wisdom is central, is necessary to Israel's very survival, as well as Israel's identity. Also interesting here is backing up to the Torah many times. This identification of the Torah as wisdom or Torah. I never know how to pronounce it. I hear Torah, I hear Torah, but we're talking about the first 5 books of the Bible, the books of the law, Moses' books. There's so many different names, the Pentateuch. Now, the interesting thing here is so many of these passages that talk about the nature of wisdom and its role in the cosmos. This is very Hellenistic, and it's explained in ways that was never expanded upon in the actual original Hebrew scriptures, let alone the story of Jeremiah itself. And so these 2 parts are what are typically referred to when we think of Baruch. We think of the repentance and we think of the wisdom. But there's a third part, and it depends on a few different factors, but this is the letter of Jeremiah. And it's typically sandwiched in with some of the rest of what is going on. I've kind of combined it here for segment Testament 3, and this is going to be hope and restoration. So we have poetic encouragement, prophetic visions of restoration, and a polemic against idolatry, which we'll cover more in problematic passages. That is from the letter of Jeremiah, which is, again, sometimes included in this. So this is what? This is consolation and instruction to who? To the exiled community. I mean, really, that's the main goal if we're wrapping this all up. We see Jerusalem personified as this weeping mother. She's grieving, but is ready to rejoice when her children return. The exiles are encouraged here to take comfort and hope in the work of their God and to trust in his promises. Baruch 4:21, take courage, my children, cry to God, and he will deliver you. Blending lamentation with hope, which is kind of a nice tie-in back to Jeremiah. We get this vision of restoration. This is what I was talking about, the prophetic vision, a vision of cosmic transformation. Baruch 5:7 says, for God ordered that every high mountain and the everlasting hills be made low, so that Israel may walk safely in the glory of God. If that sounds familiar, it's echoing Isaiah 40:3-5, the leveling of mountains and raising of valleys. It's symbolizing divine intervention, that God will still act supernaturally in the world to take care of his people. And then the third part of this is the letter of Jeremiah, which is usually represented as Baruch 6. This is that polemic against idolatry. It's warning the exiles, do not accept what you have seen in Babylon. Do not adopt these religious practices. They are not real. They are not true. He mocks the idols as powerless and man-made. They're just objects incapable of action. It's actually kind of a funny verse the way he says it. Baruch 6:15, their gods have no power to save themselves from rust and corrosion. In 670, he says they are like a scarecrow in a cucumber field. What a unique insult for a false god. I think it would make a pretty good symbol for an atheist channel, a scarecrow in a cucumber field. What a very fun little reference. The tone there is really harsh. It's very dismissive. It's emphasizing the superiority of Israel's monotheistic religion over all the other polytheistic practices, which, again, if you've been following along in my other series, Dissecting the Divine, where we see the roots of what this religion would have really looked like, especially before the exile, which, funny enough, is actually what drove them into developing their more monotheistic features as they did the amalgamation of putting together their books and their oral traditions. It's almost hilarious. But as someone who's writing in the 1st or 2nd century, that concept is so long ago that there's no harm in making fun of the polytheistic practices. Let's quickly move into point 4, a literary analysis. I've covered a lot of this already because this book's kind of all over the place. You know, when we talk about genre, we have a real combination here. It's kind of a wisdom book. It's kind of a book of a prophet. We have that prophetic exhortation. We also have lamentation. We have poetry. We have instruction. It's narrative at times and hymnal at others. So a lot going on. Some of the unique features are that it tries to parallel itself to the book of Jeremiah, and it succeeds sometimes. Sometimes the theology is almost opposite of what we see in Jeremiah, who very often questions God on what he is doing. Maybe not in the "Are you real, God?" but how can you do this? What am I missing? What don't I understand? Why do you allow your people to go through this? Where here it's kind of like a correction. We know we're bad. Us, our open shame, not his burden, ours, always us. We disobeyed. We can't keep the commands. Also seeing the personification of not just wisdom, but of Jerusalem herself is another neat and unique feature here. But let's move into point 5, main themes. These are really simple. Number 1 is repentance. Acknowledge the collective guilt of us as a people and seek divine mercy. Number 2 is then wisdom, how to move forward, how to not let this happen again. It is essential for their survival and their reconciliation with God. Just to stretch it, a third theme might be the exile itself, or at least the restoration from the exile. And a fourth theme, don't ever forget, is still covenant, God's supposed eternal promises for his people. So let's end with a few problematic passages and we'll get out of here. First, I have Baruch 1:17-22. We have sinned, been ungodly, and have not obeyed your commandments. Therefore, the calamities and the curse which the Lord enjoined upon Moses his servant have clung to us. Now, under the narrative of what these people believe about their God and about how their God acts and treats them, this makes sense. But again, if we zoom out, we see a really myopic vision of a people that can't consider anything else that is going on in the world around them. They don't see their own hypocrisy. They don't see the economic or political issues at play. They also are unwilling to blame their God or shift their belief or their views, and so they are left with one thing: to blame themselves to the highest degree and collectively, all of which I think are completely disbeneficial and will only promote the same cycle of shame and guilt and fear. Baruch 3:29, I think, gives us a problem with the exclusive access to wisdom. Again, who has gone up into heaven and taken her and brought her down from the clouds? The idea here is that wisdom, again, is only divine. This isn't something you as a human can get, kind of, again, fighting against the Hellenistic ideas of the day, trying to give control back solely to God, and propping up your particular people group that have a particular level of access to the God, the only source of this wisdom, again, as it is divine, is something that we see still transpiring within Christianity, claiming for themselves things that existed before them and that other people who didn't have their same belief were also able to find and achieve. Saying, no, you didn't. That's not real. Yours isn't real. Mine is. Only mine is, because only I have the right God. Only I know the secrets of the universe. Only I have the correct holy book. It is, again, a very exclusive nature. Baruch 4:15 through 16, he has brought a nation from far away, a shameless nation. They have brought to ruin the glory of your sons and daughters. The moral contradictions, and I pointed this out in secular Bible study when we went through many of these same books, because we see passage after passage that is attributing that it is God's will, that he is using, like chess pieces, these other nations to enact his wrath and his vengeance. But then he will turn around and condemn them for what they have done. But he was the one who used them to do that. It brings into question free will, God's sovereignty, if divine justice is consistent or arbitrary, like so many issues when, again, God reaches down from the heaven, and he must have just been bored because there's so many other ways. You know, he tried famine, he tried drought, he tried just opening up the earth to eat the people who were rebelling against him. So many different things God did, but ultimately ended up using other nations to enslave, capture, kill, rape his chosen people as punishment, and then judge those nations for what they did. Just ridiculous. I kind of already mentioned this, but the exclusive nature is also this divine favoritism, which of course there is. In every single book that references the chosen people or the one group, we know there's this divine favoritism, but we see it in Baruch 5:1. Take off the garment of your sorrow and affliction, O Jerusalem, and put on forever the beauty of the glory from God. So even though God chastises and treats very harshly his chosen people, he still has a preference for them. He still has an ultimate goal for them to achieve, and it is one of superiority. The beauty of the glory from God is theirs. Something that's come up a lot lately has been if God causes evil. You know, I've done these 2 fundraising videos, one on cancer, one on hunger, and both times so many Christian responses are, well, God's not doing that. God's not causing that. But over and over and over in the Bible, we see that it is indeed God causing it and wanting the credit for it. And we see that in this book too, Baruch 2:24 through 25. And we did not obey his voice to serve the king of Babylon. Therefore, the Lord kept the calamities ready, and the Lord has brought them upon us. God is explicitly depicted as orchestrating the calamities. It's not natural consequence. God is choosing. God is supernaturally acting this out. Why Christians don't want to give God that credit, even though they want him to be all-powerful, they want him to be truly sovereign, they want him to be the creator of everything, they want him to be in control. Oh, but if it's a bad thing, that must be something else. Why? It's so silly. I can almost literally feel the cognitive dissonance of people who think and speak like this. And again, I know that when you're just reading the verses, and especially if you're a believer, you are conditioned to see anyone else as the other, lesser than, evil, the bad guy. And we get that from Baruch 4:15. I read part of this earlier. A nation from far away, a shameless nation that speaks a foreign language, who have no respect for the aged and show no mercy to children, right? Like, this is propaganda, and it works. It's impossible to have a conversation with a Christian about slavery or genocide or anything like this because they just say, Oh, they deserved it. Don't you know how evil they were? Don't you know what they did to their kids? Like, it's so pervasive in all of these texts to just demonize the other. It makes it easier to justify your atrocities. Go back and read what the federal government wrote about the native people as we were eradicating them from this land. And tell me if it doesn't sound just like these kinds of verses. This has been used as a tactic for any people group that wanted to overcome any other people group ever. To act like one group is somehow innocent or they're fine because they're chosen, even though they practiced the exact same horrendous practices, is stupid and small thinking. So that's it. Those are the problematic passages that I'll choose to cover today. Thank you so much for being here. I hope that you are enjoying this series. I'll see you Sunday with a new video, and until then, keep thinking. I wanted to personally thank my top tiers of support: my Iconoclast and Boris GVI, Joe, Kitboga, Perry, Rocket, Sean, and Tom; my Humanist Heroes, James, Jared, Christy, and Thronis; my Atheist Advocates, Caleb, David, Jeff, Jeffrey, Lisa, Paul, Sparky, and Todd; as well as all of my Secular Scholar patrons. If you believe in the mission of this channel, or you just enjoy its content, please consider joining these fine people. Thanks, and have a great day.